Welcome to Penn Jen's Inkwell podcast. My name is Jen Waters. I hope you enjoy my stories. Louis the Christmas Bear was inspired by my love of C.S. Lewis. Of course, all bears are British. Winnie the Pooh eats honey, and Paddington Bear eats marmalade, so Louis the Christmas Bear would eat cinnamon rice pudding, which was C.S. Lewis's favorite dessert with bourbon in it. I took the bourbon out for the children's Christmas story. J.K. Rowling named Harry Potter after the beloved Beatrix Potter and the Tale of Peter Rabbit, so I figured that I could do the same with Louis the Christmas Bear. As a child, I had Freddie the teddy bear that my dad gave me the day I was born. I also had other teddy bears over the years, but Freddie was the main one. When I was in the hospital, in the Penn State Health Milton S. Hershey Medical Center in the 1st grade, and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia twice in the 4th grade for SVT, supraventricular tachycardia, where your heart goes too fast, Freddie got a medical collar similar to my wristband. So that's why Louis's nose has magic tingles that healed a young girl named Bernice in the hospital. I think my favorite C.S. Lewis story is The Magician's Nephew, because it's the only story where Aslan sings, and he sings the world into existence. I liked visualizing that point. I always thought it was ironic that his biography was called Surprised by Joy, and he wrote long passages about longing for joy, and then he ended up marrying a woman named Joy Davis. I always thought it was interesting how Lewis said that for years he had visualized a faun carrying an umbrella and parcels in the snowy wood. In the first chapter of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, readers meet that character. Lewis also said that he had dreams about lions that influenced the creation of the character of Aslan, the lion hero of Narnia. Lewis suffered a lot in his life, which you can see in the film Shadowlands with Anthony Hopkins, but he also had lots of joy. There are always shadows in the Shadowlands, but there has to be light for there to be shadows. This story is scored to Jingle Bells. I actually outlined sequels, with Louis the Christmas Bear doing all kinds of fun things, like building an igloo in Bernice's front lawn and trying to clean his fur by putting himself in the washer and dryer in Bernice's house. The series is almost like the Bernstein Bears series of books and animated television. So now, please enjoy Louis the Christmas Bear.
There once was a brown bear named Louis, who was sewn together by Mrs. Santa Claus. Of course, this was a very special bear, and Mrs. Claus only had time to make one bear like him a year. "Love is sewn in every stitch of your fabric," Mrs. Claus said to Louis, patting his tummy. "Now go find the children who need you the most on Christmas Eve," she said with a chuckle. No one but Mrs. Claus, not even her husband, knew that she had sewn magic healing power into his nose. If Mr. Claus knew that she had done this, he would insist that she do nothing but make healing teddies. Mrs. Claus had a laundry list of essential duties to keep the toy factory running and prepare for Christmas. She even had to clean up after the elves that tended to leave projects half-finished and unpainted. Between the hustle and bustle, she hardly had a moment to have a cup of tea or a Christmas cookie. However, she knew that the world needed at least one magic Christmas teddy a year to spread healing. Any child who had sickness or loneliness would only have to hug Louis and be well. If Louis rubbed his nose on a child's cheek, magic healing tingles would go from the child's head to toes, and the child would be healed by morning, good as a new bouncing ball. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Claus snuck Louis into her husband's big crimson toy sack. "There is a special someone waiting for you," Mrs. Claus whispered to Louis. She winked at him as she tightened his bow tie and brushed his fabric one last time. Then Mr. Claus grabbed his sack and swung it over his shoulder on the way to his sleigh.
"Ho, ho, ho! I can't keep Rudolph waiting any longer,"
Mr. Claus said, kissing Mrs. Claus on the cheek. As the sleigh took off into the crisp, snowy air, Louis peeked at Rudolph's shining nose. Peeking a little longer than he should have, Louis almost fell from the sleigh into the night sky. He grabbed the tassel on the red bag and pulled himself back into the sack, only to be crunched by a soldier. Ouch! Louis said. I'm only a teddy bear. Please be gentle with my fluffy body. One house after another, Mr. Claus jumped down the chimney and Louis remained stuffed in the bag. Mr. Claus picked a train, puzzle, doll, or even a picture book for the children in each of the homes. When Mr. Claus grabbed Louis, he looked at him and said,
Ho, ho, ho. Aren't you last year's model? How did you get in here anyway? I can't give you out again this year. Merry Christmas! Ho, ho, ho.
Despite Louis's tender cotton skin, Mr. Claus shoved him back into his large red sack. Louis sat on the bottom of the sack, wondering if he would have to wait until next year to meet any children. Rubbing his tummy, he felt like he had failed Mrs. Claus, who had carefully crafted him. When Mr. Claus landed on the last roof of the night, it appeared to be a large building with many rooms. As Mr. Claus crawled from the fireplace, Louis spied from a hole in the sack, realizing it was a hospital ward. From the corner bed, Louis heard a girl crying and praying. God, please send your angels to heal me. My family is so sad that I'm sick at Christmas and they don't know what to do. Please help me feel better. Louis didn't wait for Mr. Claus to take him from the sack and give him to the pale, sickly girl. He pulled himself up the side of the red bag an inch at a time until he finally reached the top. The teddy bear jumped from the sack, tiptoed over to her bed, and crawled into her tiny arms. As starlight shone through the window, her tears covered his body, but slowly she started to feel better. My name is Louis, the teddy bear whispered to the girl as he rubbed his velvet nose on her cheek. My nose is full of Christmas magic that makes all children feel better, he said to his girl. The body tingled from head to toe, and she became warm all over, like a big cup of cinnamon apple cider. You're going to feel a lot better in the morning, Louis said to her, wrapping his arms around her. My name is Bernice. I'm 10 years old, she said to him. I already feel better, much better than I have in days. By the time Mr. Claus finished passing out the toys to the children in the ward, Bernice was fast asleep. Mr. Claus climbed up the chimney and returned home to Mrs. Claus with an empty pack and tired reindeer. In the morning, doctors and nurses gathered at Bernice's bedside with raised eyebrows. Mr. Claus brought Louis the Christmas bear to me last night. Louis told me I would be well, Bernice said. No one knew what to say, especially Bernice's parents, who cried tears of joy at her complete healing. I'm going to share Louis with all the children in the hospital ward so they can feel better too, she whispered to herself. By Christmas evening, Louis had rubbed his magic nose on every child's cheek in the hospital ward. Bernice had made sure that all the children were well and kept the Christmas magic in Louis's nose a secret from the grown-ups. The day after Christmas, she went home with Louis tucked in her knapsack, promising to feed him rice pudding. Do you have a sweet tooth? My mom makes the best cinnamon rice pudding. It doesn't take long to make. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to have a tummy full of rice pudding, Louis said, patting his stomach. Every month after that, Bernice visited the hospital ward with Louis, rubbing his nose on children's cheeks. She was so glad to be his girl, and for him to be her teddy. She would love him forever.
This has been Pen Jen's Inkwell podcast. I wrote and performed all the original stories in the podcast. This podcast is produced by Eric Baines, who scored all the stories and poems in the series to original and public domain music. The podcast is associated with my blog of the same name, Pen Jen's Inkwell, which can be found on my website, jenwaters.com.